You're listening to Radio VR, the voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. Yes, he can. Barack Obama's most influential advisor during 2 presidential victories has been hired to advise Labour on its 2015 election campaign. David Axelrod has been given the title of Senior Strategic Advisor for the Labour Party. Labour aides insist that Axelrod and his team would be integral to the campaign and not be taking money just to provide a bit of stardust. He will arrive on the 14th of May in London for 2 days of strategy meetings with the leader of the Labour Party, Ed Miliband, as well as other senior shadow cabinet members. He'll be joined by veterans from the Obama for America campaign. That's Larry Grisolano and Mike Donnellan, and they will oppose a former Obama colleague, Jim Messina, who's been hired by David Cameron. Their arrival on the British political scene will pit them against the Australian Lynton Crosby. Indeed, the foreign contingent will be completed by Ryan Coetzee, who's a former South African MP, and he was one of the key figures behind the success of his country's Democratic Alliance Party. So what will this mean for the election campaign in 2015 in the UK? Do these big-name signings mean an American approach to the British elections? And is this a sign of the Americanisation of UK politics? Well, to discuss this, I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Oliver Moody. He's a reporter and leader writer for The Times. Also here is Jonathan Birdwell from the think tank Demos. John Rentoul, who's the chief political commentator at The Independent on Sunday. And also here in the studio, Kathleen Burk, Professor of Modern Contemporary History at UCL. Welcome. First of all, John Rentoul, interesting, Labour actually spelt Mr. Axelrod's name wrong on their website. It was Alex Rod. They've finally they've corrected that, but I'm just wondering, from your perspective, is this because Labour has watched far too many episodes of The West Wing? I mean, why have they? No,
there's been a long tradition of the Labour Party working with Democrats in the US. I mean, Tony Blair was heavily influenced by the '92 Clinton campaign and worked with Stan Greenberg, who was Clinton's pollster, on that. I mean, there's been a lot of interchange between across the Atlantic, and the Conservatives are just the same. I mean, my only thought about Axelrod or Alex Rod, as they called him, is that he's arriving much too late. Because I mean, the main contribution that the Americans can make, and the main lessons that they learned in the Obama campaigns, is all about managing big data. Those are big multi-year projects.
And managing that big data is very different to the Tony Blair campaign of 1997, when social media didn't exist, and that American approach might have worked then. I'm just wondering, do you think what's changed since then?
Well, voter contact was important in 97. I mean, but it was just done in different ways. I mean, it wasn't done through email and Twitter and Facebook as much as it now is. But these things take a long time to build up, and you suspect that Axelrod is being shipped in as a last-minute trophy signing.
Jonathan, do you see him as a trophy signing? I mean, he's a big signing, but from a different sport. Should we get too excited about that?
Well, I think, he's absolutely a big name. As an American who's lived in Britain for a while, I've come to experience and kind of have kind of a bit of a bemusement about just how popular American politics are among Britons. I've met more people in Britain who went and volunteered for the Obama election campaigns than I have Americans. So, I think that name recognition, does mean a lot in British politics.
What do you think, Oliver? I mean, does the name recognition, people this side of the pond have actually heard of him? I guess I'll be expecting big things from him.
Well, if you look at the last time British political party made a big signing like this, Jim Messina, last August, it made for a slot on the Today programme. And in the 9 months since, we haven't heard a wink out of him. I spoke to a couple of senior Conservative campaigners over the last couple of days, and neither of them had any idea what Messina had been doing over the past 3/4 of a year. And he last popped up in the gubernatorial race in Florida. I think there have got to be suspicions about how much time Axelrod is really going to dedicate to Labour's campaign, about how much influence Labour strategists are prepared to cede to him, and about what Axelrod's role really is in terms of shaping the policy portfolio that Labour is going to go into the election next year with.
Kathleen, interesting that Mr. Axelrod did say that Labour's political and economic analysis was similar to the central themes deployed in Obama's re-election campaign. Would you agree with that?
Well, they're all on the same side of the spectrum, in the sense of interested in social and economic and cultural policy as opposed to, shall we say, finance and foreign policy. It does really rather surprise me, though, I must say. If you look at the large approaches of American politics, they're so different from British politics. I don't mean the topics so much as, but in America it's so huge. England's 1/3 the size of California, and they need wholesale politics. In this country, it was usually retail politics. Jim Callahan used to go out and actually speak to groups of people. You don't see that anymore. And the types of things that have developed in American political strategy now, like attack ads, just wouldn't work here. The emotionalism, we don't have un-British people here. You don't have to wear the Union Jack in your lapel. It's not so emotional here. I mean, it's as it is in the United States. So I think it's penis heavy on the size, I think, of the politicos, those who actually do politics here, because they look over and they see the glamour, they see the size, they see the money, they see what appears to be the success, and they wish to import a bit of this. It's not very surprising.
But on the attack ad point, you could say that Mr. Axelrod has really had an approach of polarization. I'm just wondering, would that kind of bipartisan aspect, would that work in Britain? I mean, he's going to have to. They can't resort to attack ads in the way that they can in the United States. But do you see that as perhaps a sign that there'll be quite negative campaigning?
Well, that's what Jim Messina is good at, of course. There are some very famous attack ads that he compiled and coordinated. It will be seen, attack ads on the whole will be seen over here, I think, and my colleagues might object to this, as crass, crude, and vulgar.
Well,
John?
that's right. I mean, but one of the big differences between our politics is that we don't have paid political advertising in this country. But that's not what these guys are being hired for. They're being hired for their ability to craft a message. And the question is whether negative messages and whether so-called left-wing messages would be effective for Ed Miliband as they have been for Barack Obama. The problem is the culture is so different. I mean, as Kathleen was saying, Jim Messina is known for running negative ads. I mean, he actually ran some ads suggesting that one of his opponents was gay. That kind of thing just wouldn't work here.
Because we're too liberal.
Yeah, I think I was looking at, I think there's that, but I think there's just kind of less polarization, and there's just the kind of different cultures between Britain and the US.
And when Axelrod says the candidate is the message, I mean, what do you think he means by that, and how will that play out?
Well, I think it's coming down to more personality over policy, and historically I think there's a perception that in Britain it's been the other way around, more focused on policy rather than personality. But actually, I think historically, Margaret Thatcher, I don't know if that's necessarily such a new thing. And I think with less actual policy differences between the political parties, then it becomes more down to the personality of the leader. And of course, that's something that American electioneers have more experience with.
And perhaps that's a parallel that can't necessarily be drawn between Barack Obama and Ed Miliband necessarily. I mean, he can talk about hope and change, but I'm not quite sure he can mesmerize the masses in the way that Obama did.
I actually think that Labour's problem is not so much that Ed Miliband is not like Barack Obama. In a lot of ways, he is. I think the problem is that there is a mood of cynicism, almost this kind of nihilism among the British public at the moment, that means that somebody like Barack Obama could not succeed here, inasmuch as a candidate pushing across a serious, comprehensive, positive message would find themselves disbelieved, they'd find themselves mocked by UKIP, by negative campaigning from the opposition parties.
I suppose, Axelrod does come at a time when Labour holds a poll lead. The coalition government actually have a relatively good economic record, some may say. So Labour will have to, despite having a poll lead, and this will probably diminish between now and 2015, they don't have much room for manoeuvre.
No, but they have politics to do. They have policies to announce, and Ed Miliband's recent announcement on rent controls was a straightforward economic populist ploy of the sort of thing that you could imagine Barack Obama or even Bill Clinton doing, and those kind of things are going to work in Labour's favour, but the economy is going to work against it. I would expect the polls to cross over at some point, but that does depend on whether Labour can come up with enough eye-catching populist economic policies.
It's a bit confusing, I think. One point is, of course, is that you can vote for Barack Obama and you elect 1/3 of the American government. The question of voting for the leader here, will that carry, depends on how long we think Cameron's coattails are. I take it party. There's certainly traditionally only 15% is the amount that an individual local candidate can make. So in that sense, the party is important, of course, because it's hierarchical. You have the party, you have the House. In states, parties are coalitions. You have the party and big bloody deal. You may not have anything.
Interesting, Oliver, that, Axelrod said that Mr. Miliband understands that a growing economy demands that you have to have broad prosperity. He's talking about the people in the middle are getting squeezed. So he's talking about the cost of living. So not particularly a new message.
I would read Axelrod's hiring as a piece of internal messaging by the Labour Party primarily. We're at a very interesting juncture at the moment where John Cruddas, a senior MP, is leading a review of Labour's policies. And a lot of people in the shadow cabinet want to launch what they call a big offering, a set of really eye-catching, visionary ideas about where Britain could go. Now, there's another faction within the shadow cabinet that wants to play retail politics at the next election, to come out with a streamlined message that, like the cost of living, these sort of single ideas repeated like birds in the woodland. And Axelrod's style is very much in the latter camp. So it could be read as Douglas Alexander, Labour's chief election strategist, who had his fingerprints all over the press release on the Axelrod hiring, saying to the big ideas part of Labour, pipe down, we're in charge here.
And what big ideas be, Jonathan? I mean, there's a lot hinging on what Cruddas actually reveals, and especially given Labour's reaction to the budget, they were caught behind on Osborne's announcement with the budget. What will Cruddas announce, and how will Axelrod spin that?
Well, I think at this point we don't know, and that's the problem. That's the criticism that's increasingly targeted at Ed Miliband and the Labour Party. But I think I think it also really depends on kind of personalised messages. I think, of course, you need the kind of big you need the big policies and the kind of overarching narrative, but increasingly it's going to come down to very specific groups and very specific regions. And then there it's all about the kind of how messages are personalised to appeal to the issues that these groups care about. And that's what Axelrod and Messina are particularly skilled at, is this micro-targeting, targeting things based on more personalised messages.
You're listening to Radio VR, the voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. We're discussing, is British politics becoming Americanised? With me is Kathleen Burk, Professor of Contemporary History at UCL London and author of the book Old World, New World, The Story of Britain and America. John Rentoul is the chief political commentator for The Independent on Sunday newspaper. Jonathan Birdwell from the think tank Demos, and Oliver Moody, leader writer for The Times newspaper. John, will Labour will he try to exploit the divisions between, say, the Conservative Party and UKIP on the right?
Yeah, but I mean, you don't really need to bring in someone from another country to do that kind of thing. I mean, because these political judgments are judgments that have to be made by politicians. I mean, Ed Miliband has to decide how he's going to play the UKIP card. You don't hire someone from Australia or America to tell you how to do that. I mean, Lynton Crosby is a slightly different case on the Tory side, because He's actually running the thing. He's actually running the election campaign. He's not running the policy. I mean, that'll be decided by George Osborne and David Cameron. Oh, sorry, I should have put them the other way around. But Lynton Crosby is actually in charge. I mean, he does know how to run election campaigns in this country. He may come across as a blunt Australian to some of us, but he does understand politics in this country well enough to have lost a general election in 2005. But he did get Boris Johnson elected twice as London mayor.
But what did you make of that 2005 campaign? I mean, I remember it vividly. Are you thinking what we're thinking? Michael Howard, and quite clearly the electorate said no.
Well, I thought Lynton Crosby did what he does, which is simplify and exaggerate. I mean, that is basically his shtick. I thought they ran a fairly disciplined campaign on a rather unpopular set of policies, actually. Although you could argue that immigration should have been popular for them, but it wasn't. It was too early. 2005 was too early. I mean, if you ran that campaign now, you might have a lot more success, which as Nigel Farage is finding. And
that was the success of Lynton Crosby's victories in Australia, 4 election victories with John Howard, where immigration was a key plank of their platform there.
I mean, the other thing to bear in mind here is that Crosby is based in London most of the year now. Whereas Axelrod's firm, AKPD, that has also been hired by Labour, is based in Chicago. If you look at their website, they haven't mentioned Labour once, not even as a press release. They're more interested in talking about their role in John Edwards' failed campaign for the Democratic nomination 10 years ago than they are about installing a British Prime Minister next year.
Axelrod did benefit, Kathleen, didn't he, from, he had resounding successes, but also trying to get Obama from the Senate to the White House. He had a bit of luck as well, didn't he? And the campaign and the primaries in 2008 was very much a negative one against Hillary Clinton.
He had Obama, for one thing, who at that point was very inspirational, could speak wonderfully. The command of his rhetoric quite stunned people. Yes, the point is that Hillary Clinton was the front runner, and you have to knock down the front runner. As attack ads go, they weren't nearly as nasty as some of the other ones we've seen, I think. But no campaign strategist can win if the candidate isn't good enough. Obama was.
And one of the most gifted public speakers in recent history in American politics, Jonathan Ed Miliband. There was a relatively recent survey that 41% of people found him quite weird. That's difficult and maybe slightly unfair, because he does actually have the kind of backstory that actually quite appeals to an American voter. You know, the son of a Jewish emigre and so on.
I think I think it's unfortunate that it does. A lot of it, the outcome of elections could come down to something as visceral as just finding someone a bit odd. But I think, Ed Miliband has demonstrated in his party conference speeches that he can be an incredibly effective communicator. And if they can somehow capture that, and I know they want to do they think televised debates are a good forum for them to do that. I think if they can get him in a situation where he can be seen to be comfortable and an effective communicator, of course he's not going to be Obama, but there might be people at least shifting to think he's less weird.
John, I mean, have you noticed an improvement in Mr. Miliband's performance, say, at PMQs, which is obviously the window shop for the electorate on the business of Parliament?
No, sorry, I can't.
No? Okay.
But
he's no Tony Blair then.
Well, he's no Tony Blair. He's no Barack Obama. But as Jonathan says, he is quite effective. He's quite a ruthless and cynical politician. He's quite effective at identifying messages that cut through, such as the energy price freeze. I mean, that undoubtedly was a masterstroke of populist politics, and Jonathan's other point is absolutely right, which is why the TV debates won't happen, which is another reason why we don't really need Americans to advise us how to run our politics, because I mean, actually, TV debates would be one forum in which they'd be quite useful, but the TV debates are not going to happen precisely because Ed Miliband comes into them as the underdog, as the candidate with the lowest expectations, and will easily exceed them. Whereas David Cameron has everything to lose, and so he will find procedural ways of avoiding having any TV debates.
I mean, you could say that Mr. Miliband did steal a march on the energy debate, but interesting that Mr. Axelrod once ran a company which assisted an American firm with a campaign to hike electricity prices, and this is ASK Public Strategies. It organised the advertising company for ComEd. This could perhaps come back to haunt them.
Well, it shows up the difference between British and American politics, one might say. That ad in the United States said, look, we have to have them so we can increase funds to do very good things. Over here, the idea of any increase by business is seen as, stamping down the faces of the poor. So that the context is very different. If he can explain that, he can explain it away.
I think Linton Crosby's business connections are more of a problem for the Conservative Party than Axelrod's previous campaigns would be a problem for Labour, because Linton Crosby's firm has worked for big tobacco interests, and that really has caused David Cameron no end of trouble, and no doubt the Labour Party will find ways of bringing that back and exploiting it again. One
thing that's really interesting in the gurus that both sides have picked is that Crosby is seen as a nasty piece of work, and Axelrod thus far is seen as rather avuncular, and on the whole his heart is in the right place. So when commentators such as John to my right here will consider the two, he's almost certainly, whatever his own politics are, to say that Labour has the nicer, more
cuddly.
All right, we'll go for cuddly.
Cuddly.
But who has policies that more people can actually identify with than Crosby has.
And Crosby is associated with anti-immigration rhetoric and all that kind of stuff.
Perhaps he should be a UKIP's guru.
Perhaps he should be, but obviously, I mean, Jonathan, the levels of money that we're talking about is a lot less than America. And £2 billion, I think, spent in the last election campaign in the US, £19 million cap, I think, here in the UK. Clearly, the media will be a key part of this. And with most of the media, I suppose, rounding against Mr. Miliband, he's taken on the Daily Mail, perhaps to his peril. But I guess social media will be an area of expertise that Mr. Axelrod and his team can bring.
Yeah, absolutely, but they certainly won't have the resources, as you say, that they did in the U.S. The $20 million was spent on social media alone in 2008, and that went up to $78 million spent on social media alone in 2012. So they're not going to have that same level of resources. But, I think a lot of the work that we've done at Demos suggests that you can actually use social media. You don't need that much funding to actually make effective use of it. So I think they'll certainly be focusing their efforts on social media. They won't have the same level of resources that they have in the US, but I think they will be able to have an impact.
Social media is much more useful and important to the under 35s. And it's the over 55s who vote who don't do social media. So they may pile it in to a part of the electorate that aren't, for which it doesn't really matter because they aren't going to vote.
And newspapers like yours, the Times, really throwing their weight in behind David Cameron. So the kind of traditional media of the Fleet Street press are almost all opposed to Mr. Miliband. He's going to have to find kind of quite creative ways through Twitter and Facebook.
There's been speculation that the Financial Times could come out behind Miliband, but increasingly, I really hate to say this, but the opinions of the mainstream press are becoming irrelevant to the majority of the British public. What I think will be key in 2015 is what politics junkies call the ground war, which is campaigning on street level. And there, certainly Labour and the Lib Dems have made some very smart hirings from the US. Labour have hired a guy called Arnie Graf, who's another Obama staffer who worked with him as a community organizer in Chicago. And some people in the parliamentary establishment get a bit sniffy about what Arnie Graf does. But the Labour campaigners I've spoke to on constituency level are full of praise for the way that he can energise what are often quite ageing pools of activists, and broaden them to the point where they become really effective on the ground at persuading people to vote Labour.
So he'll be focusing on building community networks of local volunteers.
Quite. And there's also a question about how you use the increasing wealth of digital resources on voters that are available. So both the Lib Dems and Labour have bought software based on what Obama was using in 2008 and 2012 that gives them phenomenally detailed information about the demographics of individual households within individual streets. That means they can be incredibly efficient and targeted with their local strategies.
And that's quite cheap.
I think social media is in general more cheap than going through traditional media outlets. And I think Kathleen's point is right to some extent that, of course, the younger voters are less likely to vote. But what we've been looking at Demos is, can you actually use social media to mobilize groups with historically low voter turnouts? And I think some evidence from the U.S. suggests that you actually can. And the importance of being able to tailor the messages and personalize them, pick the issues that are going to be particularly important for that younger demographic, could end up leading to higher levels of turnout, which, these kind of marginal shifts, turnout and distribution, I think are going to be incredibly important in determining the outcome of the next election.
Also, Mr. Axelrod in the 2012 campaign did benefit from Mitt Romney's gaffes. David Cameron's unlikely to make those similar kinds of gaffes, isn't he? He's more polished.
Well, we look unfortunately, to Ed Miliband for the gaffes, Ed Miliband for the gaffes rather than David Cameron. David Cameron has made some interesting forays, such as into religion lately, that will be interesting to see how that plays out, because traditionally this country doesn't do God.
Well, Tony Blair didn't do God. Looks like David Cameron does.
He was stopped from doing God by Alistair Campbell.
He does God now, but when he was in office, he didn't.
I think David Cameron does God in precisely the way that the sort of Middle England does God, which is, they like to think of themselves as sort of Christians who go to church sometimes, and they prefer to think of this as a Christian country, but not as long as we don't get too sort of doctrinal about it. I think that was fine. I don't think that's a problem. But I do think David Cameron's judgment is not infallible, and I think he's quite capable of making mistakes. And actually, I think the whole danger of the Tory campaign is that they assume that Ed Miliband is a complete idiot, and they assume that Ed Balls is a vote winner for them. And I don't think you can take either of those for granted, because I think Ed Balls is a very impressive politician, who has a sound grasp of economics and has actually got the better of the argument on economics over George Osborne a lot of the time. And I think it'll be very dangerous for the Tories to underestimate the Labour team just because they look a bit weird.
You're listening to Radio VR, the voice of Russia in London, with me, Brendan Cole. We're discussing the Americanisation of British politics with Kathleen Burk, John Rentoul, Jonathan Birdwell and Oliver Moody. And actually, I suppose David Cameron's foray into religion, Kathleen, really highlights the difference between the political cultures this side of the pond and in the States, because we have, I think, an agnostic Ed Miliband and an atheist Nick Clegg also running. That would never wash in the States. God is very important in an election campaign, isn't he?
Well, indeed. It's quite interesting because God was supposed to be done out of the Constitution by the Founding Fathers. But the idea nowadays is that, of course, in God we trust is on the American flag and on every quarter that you get. The problem is that a lot of the touchstones for the types of politics that the American strategists are involved with do not work over here. And so will they be able to call up, different types of strategies to go with the different types of policies?
But some of the big themes do work. I mean, such as Obama taking on Romney as Romney being a sort of hedge fund, rich Wall Street capitalist. We saw Ed Miliband. We see him do that week in, week out at Prime Minister's questions, just sort of pointing out how rich some of the Conservative front bench are. And those sort of arguments, they are broadly the same on either side of the Atlantic. So as long as you keep abortion and religion out of politics, then I think Axelrods and Crosbys might have something to say.
But Oliver, don't people think that Mr. Miliband is part of as much of the political elite as David Cameron is?
Well, there's a problem here, which is that when you have a prime minister who was educated who read PPE at Brasenose College, Oxford, and a leader of the opposition who read PPE at Corpus Christi College, Oxford, they are seen as coming from slightly separate traditions that have massively converged, and they are also, crucially, both career politicians, which is something towards which there's an increasing antipathy. Nigel Farage has really traded on the basis of having had a previous career in business.
Jonathan, do we live in a presidential political culture in the UK? I mean, will this will be, if this is going to be a fight of personalities between two party leaders, when people in a country where people traditionally vote for the party rather than the leader, how do you think it'll play out?
From my perspective, it seems as if, absolutely. I mean, the way in which the media focuses on the party leaders is how that ends up playing out. I don't think people are necessarily crazy about David Cameron as a person, but they also aren't sure about Ed Miliband. So it's kind of hard to really say where if there is that focus on individual personalities, at least the leaders of the three parties, there's not a real clear winner.
John, I mean, a lot will hinge on what Cruddas reveals as the next kind of big policies for Labour.
No, it won't. No, John Cruddas is engaged in a distraction exercise of keeping Labour MPs occupied doing, writing papers. Policy will be decided by Ed Miliband and Ed Balls, and possibly a bit by Douglas Alexander. So it'll be Ed Miliband's judgment that counts, which is why having a presidential or a more presidential system is no bad thing. But I mean, that's what we've had in this country for years. I mean, I think the important things at this election are what's going to happen to UKIP and what's going to happen to the Liberal Democrat vote. I mean, we haven't discussed Ryan Coetzee yet. He's one of the more interesting imports from abroad, from South Africa again, which is a political culture that has almost nothing in common with ours. Yet he's been embedded in the Liberal Democrat operation for longer than Jim Messina or David Axelrod, and is actually I think much more important and more creative in terms of thinking about political strategy.
And what kind of difference, Kathleen, do you think Mr. Coetzee would make to the Lib Dems?
It's going to take a lot more than Mr. Coetzee to make the Lib Dems electable, which I think is a very great shame. One thing that's really curious about this country, what is it about British politics that they can't grow their own strategists like this? Every single party has gone abroad. Now, that's something I think politicos here ought to be asking themselves.
The only one we've grown ourselves is Philip Gould, who used to be Labour's advisor and specifically Tony Blair's personal political consultant. I mean, he combined polling strategy, focus groups, and the lot. And he's unique in British political culture. It is quite extraordinary. Where's the next Philip Gould?
I suppose it's quite reassuring, isn't it, Oliver, to throw tons of money at big-name foreign signings in the way that a football club manager might do, search for players from Real Madrid to boost their own hopes in the Premiership. Perhaps that's this kind of psychological aspect to it, whether or not it works or not.
Well, say you're Manchester United and you're not really sure how you're doing, and there's a lot of debate about whether you want to play tiki-taka attacking football or whether you want to tighten yourselves up defensively. Would it really be worth spending upwards of 10 million to hire a star coach from Bayern Munich who could talk to you on Skype once a week and maybe turn up for 2 days in a month.
Many thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. That's Oliver Moody, a reporter and leader writer at The Times. Also joining me in the studio, Kathleen Burk, Professor of Modern Contemporary History at UCL. Also here in the studio, Jonathan Birdwell from the think tank Demos, and John Rentoul, Chief Political Commentator at The Independent on Sunday. Thank you for joining me. Brendan Cole on The Voice of Russia in London.